Waking up the legs in a lot of different variations is important for the health of our hip joints. And our hip joints need stability and support along with that sense of mobility. Now, often in yoga, what we'll end up doing is focusing more on that sense of flexibility, right? How deep can we go into this pose? And when we do certain movements, especially when it's around the legs and our standing poses and in our hip joints, we often will just try to hang and go. And yes, the muscles work, but there's not that same sense of muscular activation around the hip joints. And we're going to go through a little series that's going to focus very much on a more active approach to hip mobility and getting into the parts of the legs that we often don't get into enough, which would be the adductors, the inner thigh area. And for a lot of people, they need to be strong. They need a little bit more strength in the adductors as well as more stability. And this little series here is going to give you a real great opportunity to get both the mobility, strength, because remember, mobility is the love child between flexibility and strength. So you're going to really experience strength and mobility together. Let's begin. So the first thing that we'll do is you'll need 2 blocks to support the hands. You can also do this series, parts of the series, at a counter or window ledge or at a wall as well, but blocks will work out for most of us. First thing that we'll do is bring our feet wide apart and our toes pointed out about 45 degrees. And we're going to come into what sometimes is called the goddess position, right? And just first come into that, bring your arms out to the side, palms facing up, and hold. And then look down at your knees, and you may notice that your knees are traveling inwards and down. So let's come back up there. Now, when we go down, I want you to start to invite a sense of pulling with first your femur bones. Get a sense that your femur bones are pulling up into your body. And while you're pulling your femur bones up, you're going to start to stick your butt back a little bit. And as you pull your butt back a little bit, you'll notice that that brings your inner legs back instead of this tendency to rotate down. So go a little bit lower. Keep feeling while you're expanding the legs away from you, you're simultaneously plugging in your femur bones. Go down a little bit more. Keep feeling of that little bit of that reach behind you with your butt. I'll show that to the side. So instead of, we tend to sometimes move forward like this. So it's all about trying to shift the hips back a little bit. Even if you have to lean forward slightly, that's okay. So keep that feeling of pulling your femur bones in and then starting to engage and activate all the muscles around your legs and hip joints. Pressing your feet into the floor and then continue that work. And you'll notice, it's a lot different than simply going into the pose in a more common sort of way and being here, right? So there's a layer that you're absolutely going to work when we don't add that squeeze. But there's that potential, especially for some of us who are more mobile, to hang in the joints a little bit, right? And instead of hanging, you want to pull, pull, pull. Now, when we come out of this, press down through your feet and keep that contraction through the legs. Rise up and then release. You can do a little wiggle of your pelvis like this. Now let's bring our blocks underneath our hands. So your blocks are going to be underneath your hands, and I'll show this sideways again. Your blocks are underneath your hands, feet nice and wide apart. We're going to do this movement, so aligning your hips back over your heels, legs strong, and have a slight external rotation of your femur bones. And then I'm going to drop my right side of my pelvis down toward the floor, drop my left side of my pelvis down, right and left. So my legs are straight without my knees locked, and I'm shifting my pelvis from side to side. I sometimes call this the pelvis shimmy. Good. So keep doing that side to side. I'll show it from the front. And you can even, another variation if you'd like, I'm near a wall, so you can come right to a wall and do the same shimmy. It's like you're dropping and you're trying to keep both of your sit bones at the wall. from right to left. And the wall's a beautiful tool to actually see, are you adding a rotation into the movement, or are you able to keep the pelvis moving more laterally without the rotation? Because now you have something to put your backside into to get that glimpse of what's going on. Okay, good. Come out of that, hinging your pelvis back up to standing. And then let's move our blocks over to the side for a moment. Come back and just notice how both of your legs feel after doing those two movements. Probably starting to wake up a little bit more. Now open your feet apart again. And then the toes are forward and you can bend. So you can grab your blocks again and then come into a low squat, a low wide squat here. So from the side you can see, if I'm in this low squat with my toes pointing mostly forward, the tendency, it's easier if I have my knees forward. So I'm going to resist that. I'm going to pull my hips back. And then I'm going to go from side to side. This time, when I go to one side, my one leg will extend while my other knee bends. And each time I go from side to side, I'm really mindfully keeping my hips back. Back and forth. Back and forth. We're not worried about how low we can go in the stretch and this movement. What we want to still focus on for now is this back and forth movement. And then add a little bit of resistance here. So resistance is pushing down through your feet pressing into the floor. And as you come up, feel the muscles in your inner thighs activating, and even in the backs of the legs activating. If you want a little bit more work, you can take your hands off of the blocks and then hold, come up and hold. So when I do this slow and controlled, it's a lot more work. It's a lot more effort than just kind of this sinking down. And you know, what I like to call sort of a lazy movement. So slow and controlled, as if you're trying to move your bones through these molasses-like legs of yours. Whew, and then release that. Walk your feet back in. Take a few moments. Do a little shake. I always like to shake out in between. If you need to, you can always do a top of the foot stretch, like so. Do that for a few moments. Good. And then coming back, so we're going to do another variation. Now this variation here, you can have, I'm not too picky with the toes. The toes can turn out to the side by now a little bit, not all the way like this, but if your toes were forward, they could inch a couple degrees out apart to the side. Bending again and shifting your hips back. Now in this position here, keep shifting the hips back and we're going to go from side to side, side to side, but a smaller movement from what we just did. I like to think of my pelvis running along the tracks of my adductors, as if my adductors, my inner thighs, was a train track. And so as I go to one side and then go to the other side, it's this lateral sliding movement, very slow. My feet are pressing into the floor, almost like I'm trying to move the space between my feet apart. You'll know you're doing it right if it feels like a lot of work. If you're kind of doing this going, I'm not sure what's going on, then reevaluate how you're holding yourself. You want to do that kind of squeeze action. I'm showing it from the side here. Shift the hips back and then side to side. So adductors creating a sense of tension or stability and support as you move your pelvis from side to side. Good. Doing that a few more times. And then, excuse me, and then release. Good. Now let's take it a little bit further. Now here, you can still use your blocks. Turn your feet out to the side, and then we're going to go lower, and eventually you could go all this way. So look at me here. I've got the mobility to come all the way, but I'm actually kind of hanging. There's a little bit, again, for lack of a better word, laziness going on here, where I can just sit into my flexibility, and I'm not actually gaining a lot of benefit because I'm going past my range of motion. Because if I did this more actively, I would slow it down, keep shifting my hips back, and come down, come down, come down. And so if I collapse, here's where I go. Looks really good on the surface. But if I keep that feeling of strength and stability all around my adductors, all around my hip joints. I'm going to slowly lower down. I'm still working. I'm not going to go into my full passive range. Whew. Come back up. And then slow, slow, slow. So you can see the difference. I don't go down anywhere near as far. Oh, but it's a lot of work. Good. Especially coming up. When you come up, anchor through your heel. Anchor, anchor, anchor. And then lift, contract. Let's go one more time on each side. So people can do this. That's pretty advanced to do it without the blocks. Some people will be able to do that all right. If they want, they can use the blocks like so. And then they would travel to the other side like that. And then for me, I feel like it becomes more like this Spider-Man action, right? So you're in this low, wide squat. And then you can walk your feet in a little bit, toes forward. And let's come into a wide angle forward bend using your blocks. You can extend, walk the blocks out like so. You can add that pelvis shimmy again, that drop your pelvis to the right, drop your pelvis to the left movement. That might feel delicious after all of that work. Or else hold it into a still movement. And I like having my hands on the blocks because that just gives me a little bit of extra space to extend and move into, as opposed to the floor. Even though I can bring my arms to the floor, I like this. I like using the blocks. There, and then hands back onto pelvis. Feel your pelvis like a hinge, bringing you up, right? And then release. Good. Take another moment, feet pelvis width apart, and notice, observe, tune into your body. So after that series of strengthening and mobilizing, how does that feel? What's changed? Do your legs feel more alive and strong? This is a beautiful sequence in a class in of itself as well, or in a nice active hip opening class. Enjoy it.